Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Kelly Starrett.
And I'm Juliette Starrett.
And you're listening to the Ready State Podcast.
You got it. You better stop it. You got it.
This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to us by our friends at Sleep Me. And what I wanted to talk about today is imagine a world where you wake up every morning and you are not tired because you've slept well. Imagine that.
What's cool now, if you're listening to this, chances are you maybe are looking or doing a deep dive in your sleep. We use Oura rings. We're sort of interested in seeing the ramifications of the day's inputs. Did I walk enough? Did I have a drink? Did I have caffeine too late? But I challenge you, to look at your sleeping temperature. We regularly see that people struggle to change their HRV, their resting heart rates, but there's a lot of manipulation that can go on by adjusting the temperature of your bed. And Sleep Me does that. I mean, I sleep better. I don't wake up so hot anymore, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Right. But it's been remarkable to see the impacts of just a few degrees on the quality of my sleep. I love it.
Yeah, just the amount of deep sleep and REM sleep we're getting and how good we feel when we wake up and we don't have to.
It's not about how good you feel when you wake up and what you do with that. It's literally about what the metric says. Can I have a good day? Let me ask my ring. But honestly, folks, this has changed our lives. And if you're already tracking this and looking at your sleep, this is another way to level up.
Yeah. So if you're ready to wake up like us and not feel tired, head over to sleep.me/TRS to learn more and save off the purchase of any new Cube, Euler, or Doc Pro sleep system. So go to sleep.me/TRS to take advantage of our exclusive discount and wake up refreshed every day. On this episode of the Ready State Podcast, we are excited to welcome Shane Farmer. Shane is the founder of Dark Horse Rowing. He's a rower, 4-time CrossFit Games athlete, former gym owner, Concept2 Master Instructor, and he's made a career demystifying rowing for non-rowers. He's married with 2 kids and has 13 chickens and an orchard. He loves soil regeneration, permaculture, and testing himself regularly at new and interesting forms of fitness.
Now, we didn't get into it, but 13 chickens is a lot of chickens.
It's definitely a lot of chickens.
One of the things that is so great about this conversation is there was a special time that happened early internet, early sort of explosion in CrossFit style training, where we're seeing erging come in. We're seeing sort of everyone's swinging kettlebells, doing some Olympic lifting. We're starting to see the sophistication around this. Previously, all we had was like, you were a rower. You taught me to row. I had never rowed before, really. You were either in college and a rower, and the average person just got on the rowing machine at their club one and sucked.
Right.
And Shane really fell in love with, how do I transition into coaching, teaching, getting people to love this machine?
Yeah, and I also loved, we had a conversation about how he and his rowing team at University of San Diego used CrossFit exclusively as their strength and conditioning program and saw massive gains in performance and strength and overall fitness. And I thought that was cool in this world where everyone thinks that they need to do some super secret squirrel special program for their sport. It was cool to hear that.
Yeah, that really highlights, he had this really amazing coach during that time. And really, you can see that in Dark Horse Rowing, where he's continuously trying to up the coaching game, technical game, and make it accessible and fun. People need to belong and exercise in a group. You can see that DNA in his training roots, training with this really successful team.
Yeah, so we had a great conversation with Shane, and I hope you guys all enjoy it. Shane, welcome to the Ready State Podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. It's been a while.
So I would like to go way back into the dawn of time of your rowing career, but
Yeah.
I don't know if you know or remember that I am also a former rower.
Yeah. Cal, right?
And
Do you guys
Yeah,
know?
Cal.
Can you do the handshake?
what is it?
I'm so scarred from rowing in
Yeah, yeah.
college that I have to talk about it with other rowers who rowed in college. Scarred.
Yeah, so I already could really start going deep nerd rowing, but I'm going to control myself from doing that. And just start by asking you, tell us a little bit about how you first even got into the sport of rowing. What's the origin story?
Yeah. So I played every sport under the sun in high school and leading up to University of San Diego, which is where I rowed. So I was just a multi-sport athlete. I'd done anything and everything. I was a big skier, and I thought kind of like that's the trajectory my life was going to go. and a series of events landed me at USD. And I was one of those athletes that just got like, hey, you're tall and lanky, you should think about trying rowing. And so I like went to the coaches event to like recruit all of the kids who have no idea what they're getting themselves into, and saw a video of, man, I don't remember what Olympics it was, but the men had just done really well at like either a previous Olympics or maybe one before that. And so we watched this video of the US men's 8 at the Olympics. And I was like, yeah, that looks awesome. Let's try it. Jumped in and just fell in love. It was the first sport that had ever come naturally to me. I'd always loved sports and I've been in everything, but I wasn't a gifted athlete. So I always rode the pine for everything else that I did. And then this just like clicked really quickly. And within 6 months, I was in the varsity boat. And then it just was like a love affair from there for the next 4 years for me.
I really just want to hone in on the fact that, like, in your mind, you're like, step 1, watch a rowing video. Step 3, go to the Olympics. you're like, oh, it seems so makes sense. Like, this looks like fun.
Yeah.
And then you realized you had just set yourself on fire and walking across coals. It's really difficult. Julie and I were just at Cal just the other day for something. And we were driving past the old erg room where all the ergs were kept. And Juliet was like, look, that's the erg room. Oh my God, the erg room. Ah. And then she kind of like convulsed a little bit and like deep scar. What is it that drew you to rowing? You say you had some success, but if anyone has ever been on a rowing machine or an erg ever, it's not rowing. That's not rowing.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
And if I could just sort of tack onto that question, I mean, I think it's an important one because, it is a 100% suffer sport.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so many other factors, right? The technique and the team, and there's so many parts of that sport. But I started when I was 15, and so what
does that mean? You were too? You're basically
I think
saying
I
was too young
to know one
how
way
hard
or
it
the
was?
other, how hard it
Yeah.
was. I definitely
This is
started
fine.
it
Everything's
for
fine.
social reasons. So yeah, what was it about it? Like, what about the experience? Because when you're first in a boat, especially with a bunch of people who suck at rowing, like it can be an unpleasant and feeling experience. And what was it? What do you think drew you to it?
So that time in my life was a really unsettled time. I kind of I had no direction. So I started at a small school in the mountains, Colorado. I was a terrible high school student, like 2.5 GPA, thought I was a complete idiot. I just assumed like I was not going to be a successful human in life because of how I'd done in high school. And so I went to
Durango or Gunnison?
Gunnison, Western State. So I was at Western State for 2 years. And I played club baseball there. But when I got to college, all of a sudden school clicked when I realized it was all up to me, whether I succeeded or failed. And once I got to choose the curriculum, I was a kinesiology major. And I was athletic trainer. So I like really found stuff that I loved, and all of a sudden school made sense. I was like, oh, okay, well, if I do this, then I can go do something that I enjoy. So I got better. And my grades improved enough that I could transfer to a good school. And so at the end of my sophomore year, I applied to the University of San Diego and North Central College in Naperville, Illinois. And I just knew one way or another I was going to be leaving and I wasn't going to come back to Gunnison. So
yeah, Illinois, San Diego, same.
Did you grow up in Colorado?
I have a lot of family in Colorado, but I'm from Minnesota.
Okay.
Originally, which is why I didn't have an opportunity to find rowing in high school. I was surrounded by cows and cornfields, so there wasn't a whole lot of rowing around me.
Okay, wait. So coming back,
okay.
When you first get on, you see like you're an athlete. You feel like you're into this, but the first time you sit on erg, what was your first 500? Like, tell me what your splokes. I mean, you're like,
maybe he was already amazing. Like,
well, so
130.
I don't.
125.
I couldn't tell you what my first test was. Well, I know what my first test was. I don't exactly know what my results were, but it was a 6K. The coach just
a 6K.
The coach just like
trying to get you to quit.
Yeah. Well, so I guess for some reason I was a transfer student, and so I'd like missed the first day tryouts for athletes to jump on the machines. So I had to go up to the erg room and meet the head coach, and he and the assistant coach put me on the machine, set 6K on the monitor, and then just stood behind me while I rode 6K by myself. And they just said, go as fast as you can. And
That sounds horrible.
it would, I mean, but when you don't,
and tell me more. What
yeah,
happened?
so you don't know any better, right? Like you said, when you don't know any better, you don't know any better. You just go. And to be honest, I don't exactly remember the feelings that were coming as I went through that, but I do remember the aftermath and the coaches looking at each other and like kind of smiling and nodding at each other. And that, I think, to me, that was like a motivation enough. Like, okay, so maybe I did all right enough that I could be good here. Yeah,
You rode like a 6 minutes.
I want to say I was sub 2 on my splits, but I honestly, my memory is faint at that. But it was, the original question, like what made me fall in love with it? All of that backstory was simply to say, like, I sold everything that wouldn't fit in my car, and I just moved to Mexico for the summer, and like fingers crossed that I was going to get into the University of San Diego because I didn't know. And so I had like nothing grounding in my life at that time. I got a job working at a hospital in Mexico, worst job ever. Total side story. And then I like found out that I got into University of San Diego like at the last minute. And so I think something about rowing and that team element and finding some early success became really grounding for me in my life at, as I guess 19-year-old at the time. I think maybe that's what drew me to it. It's like, oh, okay, well, there's some success here, and this feels like, hey, I got something that I could latch onto.
Let me ask you this: are you wearing an Oura ring right now?
Yes.
Okay.
No, sorry, not an Oura ring. It's a Kayla ring.
Okay. Do you track heart rate variability? Do you use a Whoop or anything like that?
I don't.
I don't. There's what's interesting is that some really good coaches have recently looked at the data and said that they could predict whether you would be a successful, high level, international level premier soccer player based on your heart rate variability. And that if you didn't have really good heart rate variability, then you would probably only be a national team level player. And the reason I mention that is there are a lot of mutants.
Is that why I kind of suck?
It's because of the Oura ring.
Your Oura ring tells you can't. You're like it limits your.
It's not actually you. It's
it's the technology telling you shouldn't reach for the stars. Just don't do it. But the reason I mention it is, it's you. Rowing has really become this piece for you, even in your business now, which obviously we'll get into. But we see that a lot of people have these latent aerobic capacities that they were physical their whole lives. They like to play, but then they discovered this thing late. We've met cyclists who became world-class cyclists. I think of Evelyn Stevens, who set the world record time trial for an hour for a while. She was a Tour de France, level rider, national team level. And, she didn't start racing bikes until she was in college.
Yeah.
And she just kind of discovered it afterwards and was like, oh, I'm good at this. Oh, I'm the best in the world at this. Like, oh, how did this happen? Did you know you had this innate aerobic capacity in there? Or was this the first time where you realized it was a very trainable system in you? Because you didn't row very well. What they loved was that you smoked it, right? You smoked yourself and went all in and didn't break.
Yeah.
But you clearly had some kind of, wait for it, penchant for it, some ability.
He loves to use that word. He's always like, when can I say penchant?
Put some good emphasis on that.
Did you know that about yourself beforehand?
No, because I hadn't really found any success in my life. Nobody had been like, you're great at this thing. You should really go for it. I had been very mediocre at everything, school, sports, whatever.
I think that's most people that we know really don't have they're not like freaks. They're like, I'm kind of good at it, but when the doors open for you, it's pretty profound.
Yeah. I've thought back many times, like, where did that aerobic level of fitness come from? And the only thing I can really credit it to was my skiing background, just the volume that our coaches would put us through, as well as all of the like quad training that we had to do for that. We would just do ungodly amounts of stairs during, the summer, and lots of running and just lots of aerobic work, wall sits to the cows come home.
Was that early on, like when you were a teen or like preteen?
Like 12 through 18. I raced slalom, and I was a ski instructor as well. So I was on the slopes 3-4 days a week during the winter. So that's the only thing I can really credit my aerobic capacity to. And then I think the thing that started to set me above, and I don't know how this happened, but I had a lot of attention to detail. And so I kind of realized, well, I may not physically be the best, but if I can hone in on the mechanics, I can start to move beyond others who aren't willing to do the nitty gritty, the detail oriented stuff, which is probably why I ended up in stroke seat eventually, was just because like the technical elements I really wanted to be a great technical athlete, and use, what fitness I did have.
Yeah, we have a couple coaches who say things like the skill carries the strength, and then the strength carries the skill.
Mm-hmm.
Those things you can be both led. You now, again, we'll get into your current project, but you're actually seeing a lot of rowers now and a lot of people who want to use rowing for fitness and other things. Do you find that most people that you're running into have had some base of success, or they're being successful, but they had an aerobic activity as a kid? Because one of the things that Juliet and I believe in is that later on in life, it's hard to reclaim raw aerobic talent, and those kids who were gifted with it, who had the potential, the pipes were there, and then had some exposure, can later on lift that up. Oh, I swam in middle school and high school, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, no wonder you're such a beast. You've been training this aerobic pathway forever. Have you found that in your own coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you've said, you to take somebody who has been historically untrained, period, and to begin fresh for somebody later in life, it's a very hard journey to try and improve both, pick it, strength, mobility, fitness, like it in any way. It's tough to begin to take on. And I think, you guys and myself probably would agree, like the multi-sport athletes are those people who have that adaptability and lay an early groundwork for how their bodies are going to perform throughout the rest of their lives. And taking somebody who has good kinesthetic awareness, a good background of fitness in general, and then from there you can drill down onto what was your sport, right? Water polo players historically make great rowers because they just have good engines. And the same with swimmers. They can get on a machine and just demolish it because, like you said, that fitness is there and easily applicable.
So I want to go back to your USD career, but before I do, I thought I don't know if you know, but both our daughters play water polo.
Yeah.
But our older daughter, Georgia, has started going to CrossFit, like at an actual CrossFit that we don't own, like just going like a normal member.
Yeah.
And she came home the other day.
Incognito.
Incognito. It's hard for her to be incognito. Yeah. She shows up at the class and the coaches are like, dude, you should probably just coach this class. But she came home the other day and I was delighted because it was some kind of like box jump rowing workout. And she's like, I destroyed everybody on the rowing machine. So she was pretty stoked on that. Anyway, so I obviously am familiar with the USD rowing program as I rowed against them when I rowed at Cal. And I don't remember it being like a super powerhouse of a rowing school, but am I correct in that you guys had like some pretty spectacular results during that time you were rowing there?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so the women's program definitely historically has been better than the men's program. When I got to USD, there was zero history of performance at the school at all. Back in like the 80s, there was maybe a 2-year window where a team did okay. And we showed up and had this ragtag group. We were smaller than rowers should be. Most of us were true novices. I think we had 2 guys who had actually rowed before. The rest of us were true novices. And we just had this grit as a group, and we all just synced in really quickly. And at the end of our novice year, so I've been in the varsity boat most of the year and thankfully got moved into the novice 8 at the end of the season. For the first time, the program went to the East Coast and we went to Dadville's, which was the first East Coast race that the school had been to ever. And so we went to Dadville's and we took bronze in the novice heavyweight men's 8, which blew our minds. And it was
Gigantic.
The end of our season. Yeah. And again, we're a small private Catholic school with no history of rowing. So it was like, that's amazing. And right after the race, as we were in celebration mode, the varsity came up to us after that race, patted us on the back, and went, hey, that was cool, but don't get used to that because that's not what this program does. This is not a winning school. And we were just like,
Wow.
what?
Okay.
What?
Okay.
And
This is
it was then that like our entire group basically said, yeah, we just said like, hey, all right, well, this is our program now, and we'll take it from here. And so we all kind of like quietly got together after that season and just said, we'll take the varsity boat next year easily. Everybody trained
Maybe
this
they
summer.
were just like, maybe they were just punking you to try to motivate you to do what you actually did.
No, they're very unmotivated.
we have heard. I can think of a famous musician friend of mine whose stepdad was like, "You'll never stick with it." And really, there's these moments we've heard where someone says something to you, and it's just enough to get under, at the right moment, the right time.
Yeah.
Coming back, one of the things that is so remarkable when it happens is culture, and when a team that happens. Oftentimes people stumble into teams. There may be a coalescing person like a Juliet who's around who, crystallizes everyone into action, as the leader. How did you all become a team? And was it just because you suffered together? Was it conscious in any way? Because one of the questions we are always talking about now is how do you recreate culture?
Mm-hmm.
How do you, when it happens, it's a miracle, but then how can we reproduce it over and over and over again? Do you have any insight into your experience there?
For us, it was highly conscious because right after that, we all said, we're going to take this varsity boat next year. We want to. So Cal, they were our idols. We looked at Cal and went, we want to compete against Cal someday because this program, nobody thinks that's even possible. And so there's this great documentary, All for One, which was like we would watch it every time we were all together. We'd sit down, we'd put the movie and play the DVD, and we would everybody would get, tingles down their spines. And like, that was our motivation. And we kept that for all 4 years. And so the next year we came back, we took the varsity 8. We stuck together every single summer. We would all check in all summer long, make sure everybody was training so that when we showed up, we would be in good shape. After our sophomore year, the majority of us committed to staying in San Diego together for the summer so that we could train together. And we went and joined San Diego Rowing Club. And then that sophomore year, you guys probably know Stefan Roche. So Stefan Roche.
Yes, we do.
Oh yeah, Stefan's a very good friend.
So Stefan was our.
Introduce everyone. Who is Stefan?
Okay, so Stefan is a larger than life human who has just been absolutely instrumental in my life. He's an OG flow master, has been around. I mean, the guy is CrossFit inside and out. And he came on as our S&C coach our sophomore year at USD. And so our CrossFit, or our strength gym turned into a CrossFit gym our sophomore year. And honestly, that we give a lot of credit to CrossFit being our strength training during college. There's so many different ways we can go from this, but essentially we found CrossFit. We all started getting strong. We committed to staying around. We joined the rowing club. So we would row all summer. We'd go row in the morning with the masters. We'd get done with practice. We'd go straight up to the weight room. We'd do CrossFit for an hour, and then we would all go start our days. And this was all summer long for our sophomore and junior summers. And the whole time we basically just kept saying we want to compete against Cal, and we got our chance. We got to go to IRAs our senior year finally, which is the national championships for men's rowing.
And how did it go before we move on? I mean, how did it actually? I have to know the end.
Yeah, so we were by far the smallest crew there, which was incredible. We loved it. We made it out.
You mean small? It's in like physical stature.
Physical stature.
You weren't 6'6", 240.
Yeah, right. We had one guy that was 6'6" in the boat, and like our bow seat was probably 5'8", 150. Like we were a scrappy crew. We didn't have a single guy on the bench either. So like a single injury would have wrecked our whole team. That's how many people were on our team. So
living on the edge.
Yeah. We made it out of the fourth final and into the third final. We took last in the third final, but for us, 18th instead of 24th was like incredible. We took out our crosstown competitors, UCSD, who had been our rivals all 4 years. And that was really what mattered most to us. And so we got to line up in the third final, which was pretty cool.
Before we move on, I want to just say a story about Stefan.
Go ahead.
I paddled slalom, whitewater, canoe and kayak,
Uh-huh.
and it was in Durango, paddling C2, and we reached out to Metrex. Do you guys remember Metrex?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Metrex bars,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Troy Aikman, the powders.
Yeah.
Well,
That was tasty stuff.
it wasn't.
It was
but it was what you had.
was the stuff.
It was the stuff. So we reached out and we got this guy on the phone who said, "I'll sponsor you," and he would send us shakes, and we were starving, basically broke paddlers, and we get these boxes of bars and boxes of shakes, and it was Stefan Roche, who we had met, and he was sponsoring us. He's like, "You kids are motivated and
This was
stoked."
in like 1982, by the way.
1998,
You weren't even born yet.
99. And Stefan really was that kind of person who made such an impact. I want to just circle back. How important was it where you started seeing, because as we get into what you're doing now, to see a relationship between movement quality, movement efficiency in this CrossFit style training and improving your rowing? Because rowing is notoriously terrible with strength and conditioning. And you guys had a legitimate.
What are you talking about? We did bench pulls.
Lots of box
it's not
jumps,
great.
You have
box
no
jumps.
idea how many bench pulls I did.
It's got a lot more sophisticated now, but back then you were actually engaged in, Stefan is a really good coach. And I mean, I just happen to know how technically competent he is, but here was your exposure. Do you credit that, or is that an important piece of your success growing and being underdogs and competing, is not just getting in the weight room, but getting in the weight room and getting actual really coaching in the weight room?
Immensely. He changed. He was more supportive of us than our head coach was, and was perhaps the only, maybe the assistant coach, but Stefan believed in us as much as we believed in ourselves. He believed in us as much as we would believe in ourselves. And that's the kind of coach he is. He will give you exactly what you give him in return. And we would sell our souls to do whatever Stefan said. And I mean, one of my favorite stories was nobody ever looks at rowing, especially at a school like USD, where there's no history of rowing. There's no alumni program with tons of endowments, and there's very little money for it. And we're not football. We're not basketball. We have nobody cares about what we're doing. We're just doing it because we love it.
There's a term for it. It's called non-revenue generating sport.
Yeah. And so we would we would kill ourselves for Stefan because we knew that would get us to where we wanted to go. And he believed in us, and we just fed off of that. And I remember one day in the weight room, we were in there with the basketball team, and those guys, walked around like they owned the place, but they would walk between stations, and it drove Stefan nuts. And we would, we loved him. Whatever he said, we would do. Run from one place to the next. We did everything they could throw at us. And we watched the basketball team kind of like heads drop and just walking from station to station. And out of nowhere, Stefan just snaps, just absolutely snaps on them, because they were losing pretty bad that season. They were not doing well. And he just dropped them into a push-up position, held them in a plank while having them do push-ups, while basically just riding them about what kind of ego could they possibly have with how poor their season is going. And we were just shut up in the corner. Everybody's just okay, we're gonna go do our work. And we loved him. I mean, he changed the future for so many of us. And I credit him honestly with being
in his gym. Did he have that Dan Gable quote? If it's important, do it every day. Did he have that in there at the time?
There's a good chance. Specifically, I don't remember it, but.
So I have to go back. This is more of a comment based on something you said a while ago, but your boat being small and crappy. And this is really for our listeners who maybe aren't rowers, and don't understand how significant it is and what a significant advantage it is in rowing to have huge people.
Yeah.
And my story I want to share with you is we would always do this event against University of Washington. And, we would row through the cut, and it was this huge deal, and it was Cal v. University of Washington. It's this big historic thing we've done every year.
Yeah.
And, there's huge crowds, and they put out this brochure thing beforehand. And it was when I was a freshman rowing at Cal, and I was in the stroke seat too. And they basically did their boat versus our boat lineup. And at that time I was like 5'6", which by the way I was probably like 5'5 3/4", but whatever. 5'6", 145.
Count it.
That's what my thing said. And then we were lined up, height and weight and name against the University of Washington girls. And the smallest girl on the University of Washington team was 5'8", 175.
I mean, women.
Woman. And I looked at that and I was like, okay, well, some kind of miracle, because, we were also a relatively small, scrappy team. And I was like, some kind of miracle has to happen here. And it didn't, because they were gigantic and they completely trounced us.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's hard for people to truly appreciate, it's like, it is, I know being tall and big is an advantage in many sports like basketball, but oh man, like having some large people is a gigantic advantage. So I want to go back though and ask you a question about your using CrossFit to be your strength and conditioning program for rowing. One of the things that, I'll be honest, really bugs Kelly and I a lot over the years is we've probably had like 500 people call us. It's more often than not parents of high school kids who are like, I need to get my kid into a sport specific training program. And they're convinced from like popular understanding or the media or whatever that each sport needs to do a strength and conditioning program that's like only for those people. Like water polo people should only do specific movements that are just for water polo people and nothing else.
Yep.
And I mean, this is true universally. And when I say you don't need to do sport specific training, you just need to get stronger and be more fit. And you can do that through a program like CrossFit. They don't believe me. Yeah. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, no, I can't do that. So I don't know. I mean, what's your take on that? Having used CrossFit, which is really a generalized strength and conditioning program in your rowing, and what's your opinion about that? And what did you guys see on the ground in terms of your, like gains and performance and probably like injury prevention and strength and all those things?
It's the ability to create general fitness is incredibly important to improving your ability to perform in a sport. For example, our warm-ups with Stefan were often tumbling. We were doing gymnastics. We were doing forward rolls, backward rolls, cartwheels, things like that. We all still love that. And that's not even close to sport specific, right? And the fitness that we were getting in there was, it was just straight CrossFit. It was not sport specific in any way whatsoever. One day a week, our coach insisted that he take over the program, in which we would do tons of high pulls and bench rows and low box jumps and things like that. And we ran that circuit once a week. But that circuit is not what got us fit enough to be able to compete the way that we did. We all just had to get strong, pick up heavy weights, move them around in different ways, and play with different.
And do it with a high heart rate. I think rowing, people don't understand. If you've been on an erg, to row well, it's very metabolic. It's very cardiorespiratory intensive. Heart rate is high. You're burning, and very technical. One of the things that Juliet and I struggle to tell people was like, if you've been on an erg, that's like riding on the back of a motorcycle holding someone. That is not the same thing as racing a motorcycle or jumping out of an airplane, being strapped to someone. There's so much technicality and timing, and it's such a team sport that sometimes I think people they fail to understand that we're really looking at, you have to be able to manage these capacities of being on fire, feeling like you're going to die, and be very, very technical and precise. And CrossFit is one of the few ways of getting there where we can actually expose you and still have you be conscious to move with quality and intention under those conditions.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I've always explained it as learning to row on an erg is like learning to ride a four-wheeler. You get the concepts. There's a seat, there are pedals, there are wheels. You understand how the system generally works. But then moving into a boat is like taking what you learn on a four-wheeler and learning to ride a unicycle. Like they're concepts transfer, but it's infinitely more complicated. And it's true. It's highly, highly specific in how you have to handle the technical components and balance that with just pure suffering. How do you bury yourself physically and keep the mental capacity to focus on maintaining high skill? That's the balance.
And you have to listen. There's a bunch of people in the boat with you,
it's
right?
It's more like biathlon, right?
Yeah.
Shooting, but dancing with partners at the same time.
You can't be a standout. There's no such thing as an MVP in rowing.
No. Okay,
Except
so
for you, Jay.
yeah, I know. Well, I'm state champion. Just making sure you know that. California state champion.
Noted.
Anyway, you obviously found CrossFit, and then and CrossFit is how we originally met you.
Yeah.
I think in 2008, 2009, 10 timeframe. So after college, you go on to actually become a competitive CrossFit athlete and a coach. So tell us a little bit about that journey. I mean, did you graduate from college and immediately go all in CrossFit? Can you tell us a little bit about your official CrossFit journey?
As is any collegiate athlete, when your college career is done, you often have this void of what do I do next? And
No.
and so
they kick you out of the weight room.
Yeah.
You lose your facilities, you're done. So if you're in a fall sport, your whole identity is over.
Just gone. Yeah. And you really have to rectify that. And for me, I went and got a job I was a business major. So I transferred majors when I switched schools. And so I thought I was supposed to get a job with a suit and a tie. I went and sold life insurance and shout out to Northwestern Mutual. That lasted all of 9 months. And I was miserable every single day, putting on a suit and tie, sitting in an office, dialing 100 people a day, and zero fitness in my life. I was like, how can the shift be that abrupt? And I didn't really understand that CrossFit gyms existed outside of our weight room because I hadn't really seen it in the wild. And I just happened to be on this walk one day in downtown San Diego and walked past this big open garage door in Little Italy in San Diego and saw what looked like pull-up rigs and some barbells and a bunch of people in rubber mats. And I went, that looks familiar. And so I poked my head in and kind of sheepishly like, is this do you guys do CrossFit? Is that what this is? And they said, yeah. And so I came in and checked it out and immediately became a member, fell in love with that facility, and things just kind of snowballed from there. And that facility happened to be Invictus. Yeah.
We spent a lot of time there during that phase.
Yeah. I have so many fond memories of that place.
Yeah.
I mean, CrossFit Invictus still exists, but I think that particular gym is no longer, right? That location.
Yeah, that whole block was smaller.
Did you start coaching? I mean, first of all, let me just say that one of my favorite things in the world, and we did this famously with a few athletes, good collegiate athletes with huge engines. And I'm like, come with me and get coaching. And then I'm like, oh, you're the best in the world. That's so weird. Like we take good raw material and then we just tweak it a little bit, shape it a little bit, coach a little bit, support a little bit. And rowers are great because you know how to suffer and really work hard. So you must have been welcomed with open arms to start with. And you had Stefan as a coach. When did you translate or transition from sort of athlete to coaching, or did you make that formal transition when you were in that period?
It was the day that I realized how miserable I was selling life insurance.
I have to do something else.
Yeah, I quit I just walked in and went, here's my 2 weeks. I have no plan, but I can't do this anymore. And thankfully I'd made enough in my first 9 months that I had a decent
little buffer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was like, well, I've got 6 months to figure it out. And so I better do that quickly. And I went, if I quit good money because I was miserable, then I better do something that I love. And I'm in this CrossFit gym space and I'm seeing rowing and nobody's doing it correctly. And as a rower, I take that as a personal insult. And I'm now starting to consider myself a CrossFitter. And so I kind of nudged CJ one day and I just said, hey, if I were able to teach people, is that something I could do here? Start teaching people how to use the machine? And he said yes. And that was kind of the start of my whole coaching career was that moment.
I just want to pause for a second and say that for the birth of your second child, what did you get from your husband?
Did I get a rowing machine?
Yes, you did.
I already forgot.
In San Francisco, these things called push presents.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Push present, right? A push gift.
Yeah.
But Julia got a pull gift. And people were like, wait, you did what? You gave Juliet an erg for her birth?
You punished her?
It's a very twisted and mean present.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like a present to me.
Oh, wait, hang on a second. Because I want...
No, me. You keep cutting me off. Ooh, busted. Your tooth.
Don't make me take my tooth out.
So I want to talk a little bit about how you transitioned. Don't make me take my tooth out.
Everyone, I'm doing this talk and I have no front tooth.
He's wearing a clip-on tooth while we're while we're
fine.
recording this
It's fine.
podcast. Anyway,
Now I know what to get you for
so
Christmas. Another clip-on
Suffer from
tooth.
my art.
I don't know if I met you prior to that, but we were competing in the same year in 2010,
Mhm.
both on teams. You were on Invictus and I was on the San Francisco CrossFit team. And that for me was my last year able to compete.
You beat Invictus at the at the regional tri-state championship.
Yeah, tri-state championship. We won, state champion again. And it's obviously a theme.
Comma.
Anyway,
Again.
but I felt like it, I sort of tapped out in 2010. Like that was sort of for me, like the last year that I could reasonably compete and still be like a person who had like a full-time job, not as a coach, full-time job. I had a couple little kids at that point. I was like, okay, it was, and it was starting to become a professional sport then.
Right.
And the other thing that was key for me is that up until 2010 in CrossFit and maybe through 2012, you could be an athlete like me, which sounds like you were not like this, but I was not really a great athlete, very skilled and not a great mover. But man, could I suffer.
Mhm.
And in the early days of CrossFit, you could still compete at a high level in CrossFit just on like the ability to suffer alone.
Yeah.
A lot of the complex skills weren't being programmed into workouts. And so you could kind of get by as like a pure suffer sporter. And I felt like, 2010 was kind of it. After that, it was like, you had to be both high skill and sufferer.
Yeah.
Baby, you're skilled. You're skilled, baby.
So anyway, I mean, how did you stay in the game for 4 years as a competitive games athlete? And, why did you stop? And what was your road there?
Well, like you said, back early in, even probably up until about 13, after I retired, there was a lot of just, if you were good at figuring it out, you could compete. Right. If you had the ability to suffer and you had good figure it out ishness, then you could kind of go. Right. Like my very first regionals, I was an individual. This is back when it was sectionals sectionals. Right.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So it was sectionals we did in the parking lot at SoCal, but regionals, I DNF'd a workout that was 20 shoulder to overhead at 185. And then 40 burpee over the bar. I DNF'd it because I had to clean and split jerk that bar for every single rep. So I was,
and you were like, oh, yeah, the sport is actually becoming a legit sport.
I was not strong. And that was my first year. So like I had to get really strong in order to be competitive because I was tall, lanky, I could figure it out, and I had the ability to suffer. And I enjoyed the technical aspect of learning new movements. And so that was what I got away with for a long time. Could I compete now? Not a chance. I don't have the same raw strength that's required nowadays.
You get picked up by Concept2 and you start become you kind of identified in this community too, which is suddenly buying ergs. I mean, just not rescue Concept2, but blew Concept2 up to the company it is. CrossFit, everyone suddenly realized it was, I think fitness athletes now are like Assault Bike, Rogue Echo Bike is the worst. But before we had those things, it was the erg. Mm-hmm. And the erg ruled and dominated our world. It was so bad. How did you transition into wanting to stay with rowing? A lot of rowers are sort of not rowing curious anymore. They are devoid of or want to kind of remove themselves from that suffer. You move closer to it. You become a rowing coach, a rowing specific coach, and now with Dark Horse, you really are trying to use that as a centrifying, centrating force in people's lives. Can you talk about that transition and what you're currently trying to do with Dark Horse Rowing?
Yeah, so it just started because I wanted to travel and needed to figure out a way to make money doing it because I didn't have a whole lot of money as a coach. And so I just created a 1-page PDF of a seminar. And this is in 2010, I think, maybe 11. And I emailed it to, at the time, every CrossFit gym I could find in Europe that I could get an email address for. And I sent it to them. And one gym in Switzerland picked it up. And that was like the whole start of my like real coaching career. And when I came back from that, Concept2 called, and then I became a master instructor for them, became the CrossFit rowing head coach, did that. And the point at which I transitioned into Dark Horse was when I realized how much of a fire hose of information was coming out in our 1-day seminar. Like
Yeah.
there's so much that you throw at people. They walk away with maybe 10% of the information. They just cannot handle that much info in one day. And so I was getting lots of follow-up saying, well, how do I keep learning? How do I keep working on this? And that really was what inspired Dark Horse. And what has continued to inspire Dark Horse to this day is how do we be that resource of understanding how to demystify rowing for people? And that's kind of what I've really enjoyed doing. Is I don't ever try to force rowing on people. I don't try to make anyone love rowing. I just realized there's a lot of mystique around it, and how do we move well? Why do we do it in certain ways? And how do we relate that all to fitness? And that's kind of the whole like origin story of what Dark Horse was intended to do, and what I think what we're still doing this day.
And so tell us a little bit just about the nuts and bolts. Like if you become a member of Dark Horse Rowing, are you getting rowing programming, rowing instruction? Like tell us a little bit about what actually is underneath the umbrella of the program.
Do I actually have to row?
Do you actually have to try
Yeah,
rowing?
there are touch points with rowing, unfortunately. So we kind of try to, yes, there's programming in like our monthly program. But I also understand that inherently for many, rowing is an accessory to a primary program that they may use. And so the way that I have always philosophically believed we should program is the minimum viable dose to be able to help somebody improve on the machine without overwhelming their primary programming or desires. Now, some people obviously lean into it more and they just want to row, or they just have a rowing machine at home. And so the way that our programming works is we deal in traditional programming, the way that we've all learned to write and coach and whatnot, but we make sure that in any warm-up opportunity that we have, we're fixing in drills that are traditional to rowing, and we help people to just onboard the mechanics on a pretty light basis and gradually over time, so that we aren't trying to make it too heavy up front. We give people that steady drip of practicing the mechanics of it so that they can get comfortable with the movement. And the more that we can introduce that in a palatable way via warm-ups as opposed to entire drill sessions, the more success that we found we're able to deliver in like a consumer product.
You, your rowing program is really a cogent and whole, and I think it helps to have been like a novice as an adult. Like Juliet can get on the erg unconsciously. She's been doing it since she was 14, right? Aaron Cafaro, our good friend, Olympian, has rowed so many miles, so many kilometers that it's automatic. But how important for you to have a strength and conditioning background to understand rowing differently? Because my critique of so many coaches, especially in the college level, is that they are experts and masters and maybe creating culture and programming rowing and solving problems of rowing with technical drills, but their athletes are missing ranges of motion, super weak, not very competent in transferred skills. How important was it to have this really solid background to come back to rowing? Did that make you a better rower, knowing what you could see and how people were moving when they didn't have an erg handle in their hands?
This is not intended to sound like I'm giving you too many congratulations here, but to be honest, it was the fact that I was a young coach at the time who was just starting to figure out what coaching was. And I got to be in an incredible environment surrounded by amazing coaches like you guys at Invictus, which, I feel like we don't see that as much anymore. But Invictus back in the day, every big name in coaching would drop in for weekends and be hosting seminars or just hanging out with us as the athletes of the team. And we were getting front row seats to watching some of the best coaches in the world. And so I continually reference you, Kelly, when I'm talking about my own coaching, because you may not have known it, but I mean, you were a mentor to me back in the day as I was becoming a coach, because I learned to have a love of coaching because of the incredible coaches I was surrounded by. And
it was a special time, a special place.
I mean, never to be repeated again. It was truly special. And that really meant something to me because I was determined to figure out how to make this my life and my career, not just a moment in time, like a placeholder because I didn't know what else I wanted to do. I loved it so much that I needed to grab as much as I could from all of the incredible coaches I was seeing. You know, as Coach Bergner was down, or you had Carl at your gym. Like we were just, it was so incredible. And so a lot of my philosophy comes from just gleaning bits and pieces from every single one of you and understanding how applicable it was to what I was teaching and how I could draw from every single one of you, and how it wasn't just this single movement that stood unto itself, that it was just a small part of a bigger picture.
Amazing.
Yeah, that was a pretty amazing time. And thanks for shouting out Kelly as a coach, because sometimes he feels like he's been reduced to being the stretching guy. But if you ask him what he does or how he sees himself as a coach. So
legal
anyway,
stretches, shout out legal stretches.
yeah. But anyway, so one of the things I wanted to ask you about is sort of related to like what's happening in the fitness business at large. And as I track the trends and what's going on in fitness, I can't help but notice that there appears to be like an explosion of rowing companies.
Connected rowing?
Yeah,
that's the right word?
specifically
my
connected
garage
rowing.
would
I mean,
agree with you.
Yeah. I mean, Hydro is obviously the first one that, you know, I ever noticed, but, you know, I track what's going on and I'm like, wow, there's another connected fitness company or another rowing platform. And, you know, what's your sort of take on all that?
Has it helped?
Has it helped? Is it bringing more people into the sport? Is it not great? Because
we have a neighbor who was like, I want to get fit. I bought a rower, and I was like, oh, well,
you know, but there's also
when you're ready to sell it, let me know.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I don't mean to be like a, you know, OG rowing perfectionist, but I'm like, well, rowing's actually complicated. Like, I don't know if you can do that. So I don't know. I just wanted to get your take on like, what are you seeing in the business? What do you think is going to be successful? You know, what's your take on sort of how rowing has dropped into the, you know, sort of larger fitness consciousness through all this connected rowing and so forth?
Okay. So I don't want to say that I saw it coming, but I saw this coming way back when. And it's why I stuck with it. It's like, I genuinely felt this like growing sense of interest behind rowing before it was cool. And now, like you said, you have Ergata, Hydro, Aviron, Whipper. I know I'm missing at least a couple, but I mean, these are all just startups making rowing machines. Whereas 10 years ago, Concept2 and Water Rower were it. That was your only option.
And then, not to like interrupt you really quickly, but can't you also go to like a gym where all you do is row?
Yeah, Row House, City Row.
Yeah.
I mean, row, like I even started one in Houston back in the day, before City Row and Row House actually figured out how to do it well. So yeah, it has been, I think, beneficial for rowing in so much as it's putting more visibility in front of people. The unfortunate side of it is, I don't know how many of these companies will be around 5 years from now, 8 years from now, when funding runs out and when, you know, they may not be able to continue to deliver what they once promised. I would like to think that they all will be, because that means that the ecosystem will continue to grow and evolve, and it will elevate rowing further and further. As what machine I think, you know, people should be leaning into, I still just go back to Concept2 for most people, because it's just a great, it's the Toyota of workout equipment, right? It's like
Juliet and I get to travel for work, and one of our great delights is to uncover some like Model A, Model B. Like we've seen like the bike tires, like in the corner of some gym in Korea, some place in South Africa. There's an old erg, and Juliet and I are like, it's gonna be fine. We're right home.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I think that you know, if Kelly and I ever get asked, you know, like what home gym equipment should I have, like a rower would be extremely high on that list. I mean, those Concept2 machines are like complete workhorses. Yeah. You can like, you know, move them around a lot and they survive and they last. And, you know, maybe every 5 years you have to get a new monitor or something like that. But I mean, those things are just
our
workhorses.
Children do not, they'll go out of their way not to touch our.
Yeah. But they're amazing workhorses. And I mean, you know, I guess for a lot of people, they're still very expensive, but I mean, compared to these connected rowing devices, they're
half the price,
downright affordable.
Yeah. It's funny that you said South Africa. I was on a safari in South Africa, and I got invited to the Rangers like clubhouse where they had a gym, because I got to know one of the Rangers, and I was like, "Can I come work out in the gym with you?" And he's like, "I'm gonna have to get special permission for that." We get there. There's a Concept2 sitting outside, half the seat had been chewed away by a hyena one night overnight. So there was half a seat.
Please tell me you have a photo of that.
I do somewhere. I don't know where I would find it now, but I know it's saved somewhere. And then half of the handle had been eaten as well. And they still I wrote on it. I did a workout on it. It was fantastic.
I hate it when that happens.
Yeah.
Hyena
So
butt.
I have one more story to tell you. Maybe 4 years ago or something, Erin Cafaro gave me this program she'd written up called the Row 2K program. So it was, I don't know, 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And the whole goal was to try
Erin
to
is a
PR
two-time
on your
Olympic
2K.
medalist.
And so I did the whole program like dutifully. Like it was so much rowing. I'd go into the garage and just row by myself for like an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, I was like, I felt so good and I was so fit. But because of my history and psychology around rowing, I couldn't actually bring myself to do the test at the end.
Yeah. I
Noted.
know the feeling.
Good.
I know the feeling.
Like I was like, I had this sort of whole plan. Like I was like, I'm going to hold a 151 for this long and then 153 and this whole thing. And I literally I could not bring myself to do it. So,
yeah,
but I was real fit by the end of that.
I still get back into a boat usually twice a year, once in the fall, once in the spring for races. And last spring, we were putting together a really competitive boat, had just a few former national team athletes and Olympians in there. And so we similarly went down the path of actual 2K training because we just wanted to womp on the competition. Like we did not want to show up and even there be a thought that we wouldn't win the thing. It was so mind-numbing to get back on the machine. And I did not want to retest I wanted to get on the water and hit our 2K. But I did not want to test that 2K.
It's the
psychology.
psychology.
I was like, I can't.
It's always there for you. If you heard a little bit, shout out to my mother who loves to row. She is a huge rower. She continues to row a ton. Can you give everyone listening who's never been on an erg one reason why they should start rowing?
One singular reason for all people?
Yeah, like why should we start rowing? Why should we care? Because sometimes I look at that thing and I'm like, I don't want to care.
It's I think it comes down to the completeness of the movement and how much is accomplished in a singular stroke, let alone repeating the stroke over and over. But the fact that there are strength demands, there are kinesthetic demands, there's the aerobic demand, there's so much that can be accomplished in one singular movement with so little risk. To keep it short.
Great answer. So
it's true. I don't know many people who've exploded rowing. I mean, I know rowers who've exploded rowing, yes, pulling on a 16-meter long lever.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's different.
And rotating to one side for 10 years straight.
Yeah. So tell us what's next. What's on? What are you looking forward to? What are you working on? What's next?
So we are currently launching affiliate programming. So we're dropping onto every gym software platform currently. Modify, Push Press, Sugar Wad, Beyond the Whiteboard.
That's great.
So we're launching an endurance program that includes and ties in any rowing machine or any machine, endurance machine. So air bikes, biker, skier, rower, treads. That's our current trajectories. We're making sure we get that launched on all those platforms as efficiently as we can, and learning 4 different softwares at the same time. So my team's pretty busy. And then I'm working on spinning back up into the YouTube content. I took about a year hiatus, and so I'm starting that journey again and having fun creating new content and starting to rethink the way that I shoot content.
Keep telling yourself you're having fun. It's so fun. It's so fun.
I
common erg mistakes.
I enjoy it because I know it's my outreach to coach, since I don't have an actual coaching facility anymore. That's the one thing that keeps me going on that.
So Shane, where do people find you on the internet and socials, and how can people find more and learn more about what you're up to?
darkhorserowing.com.
And become a more awesome rower.
Yeah, darkhorserowing.com is our website. And probably the best place you can find my mug is youtube.com/darkhorserowing. And that's probably our most prolific platform. We are on Instagram and others, but I really enjoy YouTube. So that's where we put the majority of our focus.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It is so fun for us to have this experience where we're all kind of teenagers in a garage together, and then to see people grow up and have these mature businesses and, and evolve into legit people. I mean, it just tickles us, and it is so fun to see what you're doing, and we so appreciate it, man.
Well, thank you guys for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Ready State Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check out all our episodes here or at thereadystate.com. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes to help others find our show.
Check us out and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Ready State.
Until next time, cheers, everyone.
You got it.